Bulavinaka, good evening and namaste. I'm Vijay Narayan. You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk, and our show tonight focuses on a very critical issue, our electoral system. What can be done and what should be done? Consultations are about to start, public consultations around the country. And in studio tonight, we have the chair of the Electoral Reform Commission and former Chief Justice Daniel Fatiaki, and also economist, former National Federation Party parliamentarian, and one of the Electoral Law Reform Commissioners, Professor Wadan Narsey, who is joining us live via Zoom from Melbourne. Gentlemen, first of all, Mr. Fatiaki, thank you very much for accepting our invitation to appear on the show.
Thank you very much, Vijay. I appreciate very much being able to appear on this show. This show has a reputation, and I was very glad that I got the invitation to come. So thank you very much. The matters that we're going to discuss are crucially important for our country, and I think the wider the audience, the better.
And Professor Narsey, thank you very much for joining us from Melbourne.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Now, starting off with a question for both gentlemen, starting with Mr. Fatiaki. Coming out of retirement, former Chief Justice, I remember the last time that covered something about you was in the court corridors when you were unceremoniously removed by the military as the Chief Justice of Fiji. Now, many years later, you're coming back to do a very important task. But it won't be right for me to not mention that you were unceremoniously dismissed as the Chief Justice of Fiji. What do you have to say about that, and years after returning to do this very important work?
Thank you very much, Vijay. I am not a person to dwell on the past. When I left, I said that doors had opened up for me, and my life has moved on from that place. I had to work overseas for a decade, and I'm appreciative that people wanted me to work in their countries, and I did. But finally I've returned. The work that we're about to do is very important for our country. I suppose, really, for me, it is a labor of love. I love this country very much, and I have voted in all the elections, including the two under the 2013 Constitution. And since my return, as you're probably aware, I took up a hobby of writing letters to the editor. And one of my pet topics has been the electoral system. So when they asked for expressions of interest, I invited Wadan if he would join me, and he very graciously said yes, and we both put up our hands. And the rest is history, as they say.
Professor Narsey, you have been in politics, former parliamentarian for NFP, of course, also now coming out of retirement. What gives you that motivation?
Well, Vijay, I think I have to remind people that I was an NFP parliamentarian 25 years ago. And after my 3 years in Parliament, I then stopped all association with the politics. But I will also remind, I'm a founding member of the Fiji Labour Party in 1985. And when governments thereafter asked me to serve, on their boards, I mean, Mr. Chaudhry asked me to serve on the Fiji FNPF Investment Committee. I did that. Mr. Garase and Mr. Yavala Kumumbola asked me to serve on the FERCA board. I did that. And, even Mr. Beni Marama, he asked me to join his military council, except that I said, please, it's this coup you're doing is not going to be good for Fiji. Every coup has hurt the Fiji economy. And I have, of course, been writing on electoral systems right from the time I was in Parliament, when I argued very strongly against the system that was being, presented to Fiji. And on that commission was my brother-in-law, Professor Bridgelal. And I disagreed with that system. And what I've predicted actually did come to pass in the 99 election, when not just NFP was wiped out, but SVT was also absolutely shattered. So, I mean, I would like to contribute. I've written a lot on electoral systems, and if the public wants to read what I've written, they're all there in my volume 3 of my community education books, which is called Our Struggles for Democracy, Rule of Law, and Media Freedom. You can buy them in the USP bookshop, buy them on Amazon for US $5, and I've got a lot of them on my website. So, with Mr. Fatiaki, looking after the legislation sides, and with me looking after the electoral reform sides, I thought we would make a very good, strong pair, to tender for this. And we were very happy when we received the tender. And, our only interest is basically, I am semi-retired. And if we can help Fiji, we'll do so, even though for people like me at my age, to come out of my comfort zone here in Melbourne and come back to Fiji for 2-3 months is very, very hard, I must say. It's very hard. But, we'll do it because I think we can make a difference.
There's been some attacks about you connected to the NFP and NFP coming into the commission. What's your comments on that?
Well, I think that NFP, Ms. Nambo, she tendered to be on or to do this work, just like Justice Fatiaki and I did. We were not picked by anybody. And I actually am very happy that Justice Fatiaki is there because he's got no political allegiance. And to be honest, neither do I. Even though, the leader of the NFP is my former colleague from USP, Professor Biman Prasad. But, I've been critical of their policies as well as praising their policies and praising their government. I've been also critical of the, Rambuka government as well. So, I try to be very, very neutral politically. And as far as I'm concerned, all that matters is what is good for the people of Fiji. And that's the only reason why I came out of retirement. I've stopped doing all my consultancy work, which I used to do, for so long. A lot of it used to be with the Fiji Bureau of Statistics when Mr. Tim Bainimarama was the government statistician. And he was very happy to use my services, of course, although his younger brother, was not all that happy.
Mr. Fatiaki, what have the past coups of this country done to Fiji's lawmaking process? I'm asking you this question as you have been a former Chief Justice, and how have we as a country suffered as far as development is concerned?
Thank you, Vijay. As far as the law-making processes go, when I went to law school, it's a difficult question. I can only answer it by telling you what I went through as a lawyer. When I went to law school, I studied constitutional law. And I learned that in a constitutional democracy and in any democratic government, the laws were made by Parliament for the people. And so any other way of making the laws was something that I wasn't taught, and I certainly don't understand it at all. You don't study coup law in law school, you study proper constitutional law. And so coups are generally illegal things. Well, not generally, they're always illegal things. So they don't teach you illegal things in law school, least of all coup law. What's it done for our processes? The last sets of coups, military coups, removed democratically elected governments, and with it all indications of democratic rule, including how the laws are made. And I think that's real tragedy for the country. We became ruled by decrees, and decrees are, on the face of them, illegal. I don't even begin to understand how you can rule by decree. What I do know is an act of parliament is an act of consensus in parliament by elected representatives who represent people. A decree is a unilateral document with no consultations and just imposed on people. That's not my understanding of what the law should be.
Professor Narsey, as an economist, what are your views? How much has the country lost through the coups from 1987 to date, with almost, 8 years of no parliament, from December 2006 to 2014, and many laws that came through at that time came through decrees that eventually were just passed as acts.
Well, the thing is, to me, Vijay, I let Justice Fatiaki talk about the lawmaking process and so on, but for me as an economist, what I've seen, the facts are, and the economy virtually mirrors what happens to the tourism industry. So in my articles, many articles I've written in my books where I talk about the costs of our coups, you have a graph, and the graph is going upwards, like the tourism arrivals, the graph is going upwards. The coup happens, the graph drops. Then the tourism industry tries to get back, and then the graph grows again. Another coup happens, and the graph drops. And then they try to rise again, and another coup happens, and the graph drops. And so the GDP of Fiji has been doing that right from 1987 times. And one of the interesting comparisons I have made with Fiji is that of Mauritius, which is a small island country like us in the middle of the Indian Ocean, depends on tourism, sugar, and it's multicultural like us. And their GDP per capita in 1950 was less than ours. In 1970, it was less than ours. And then, because of our coups, we suffered and suffered. So today, their GDP per capita is basically twice that of Fiji. Twice. Which means, can you imagine where everybody's income in Fiji was twice what it is? And yet we have done this to ourselves with no real benefit to the people, of the country, of course, except that coup makers have always benefited. And unfortunately, when I look at Fiji and I compare ourselves to Mauritius or Singapore, is a real other extreme example, there's no reason for poverty in Fiji for anybody. But these coups have done us enormous, enormous harm. And I think Justice Fatiaki will explain how the laws that have been passed, have really frightened away investors and so on, right? But, for me, when you don't have confidence in the country, when tourists don't arrive for, 2 years because, a coup has happened, then everybody's income suffers.
Statistically, have you done any numbers? How much have we lost as a nation?
Oh, I have done that. I've done that, and they're in my articles, and honestly, they amount to billions of dollars. And in effect, basically, whatever the GDP of Fiji is at the moment, you could have doubled that if we did not have our coups. And the way, of course, you can explain it to ordinary people is that, just think about what would happen, what you could do if you go to the supermarket, if your income today was twice what you are receiving now, currently. So it's a huge amount, Vijay, and honestly, how to get that across to ordinary people is difficult, because ordinary people, when they go to Australia, New Zealand, they know what the difference in life is between there and Fiji.
Now, Mr. Fatiaki, a lot has been said about the way Fiji has been making laws. One is by decree. The others, a lot of the laws being passed through Standing Order 51, Parliamentary Standing Order 51, which is done without consultation. From your point of view, what are the negative impacts of this in making these types of laws without consultation from 87 to past 2006?
Thank you, Vijay. I began to answer that by saying that what has been happening since 87, every time that we've had an unelected parliament, is that we've basically passed illegal laws. All decrees have been illegal. There's no foundation at all for decrees. Laws are passed by parliament, and they reflect the view of the majority. They're also the view of the persons of the public through their representatives, elected representatives. So a decree reflects nothing but the authoritarian dictatorship that instituted it. And I have a classic example of this, a decree which will go down in the infamy of this nation is Decree 51. Decree 51 is basically ripped the heart out of pensioners. It is the FNPF decree. Ripped the heart out of pensioners. There was no consultation, and pensioners who are receiving 15%, 19%, 25%, suddenly by a stroke of a pen and a decree were forced to accept 9%. And pensioners actually went under the poverty line as a result. No consultations, none at all. Just by authority, whoever has the power, dictatorship. And that decree remains today. Quite often what happens with governments that come after coups, where there have been decrees, is the government reconstitutes itself, considers afresh every single decree, and either agrees with it or rejects it. If it rejects it, it passes an act of parliament rejecting it. If it agrees with it, it ratifies it under an act of parliament and makes it an act of parliament. That has never happened to Decree 51 and 52 dealing with FNPF. To this day, no government has bothered to actually ratify it and make it an act of parliament. And yet, this decree repealed an act of parliament, which is like heaping injury on injury. You know, an unlawful repeal by an unlawful decree, passed by an unlawful government, created by an unlawful coup. The level of unlawfulness in this country is shocking. I just can barely fathom it as a lawyer. It's shocking.
And with people growing up in this day and age, and if it's for many years we have this type of rule for both gentlemen, what do we expect from our younger generation?
Well, it's really almost ironic that I have 4 sons who were born post-87. They know nothing else. They live their entire life in coups. And it wouldn't surprise me if they think that's the way to go about changing laws or changing governments, because that's all they knew. And now my grandchildren are going through it. So this is my little effort to try and give my grandchildren true democracy. Not some one constituency hash job. No, one which is part of public consultations. Why do you think at my age, past 70s, I'm willing to walk the streets, the farms and the roads of this country to talk to our people, to find out what they want for their electoral system? Because I care. I want them to own it when I've finished and protect it from more coups.
Professor Narsey, what are your thoughts on the younger generation living through coup after coup and just knowing the way things are just ramming through laws?
Well, if I may add to what Justice Fatiaki was saying, because I was in Parliament between 96 and 99 when we approved that 1997 Constitution, and it was passed unanimously by the lower house and the upper house, right? So that had the legitimacy of the people's representatives. And when it came to the 2013 Constitution, which Justice Fatiaki talks about, Decree 51 and 52, there was no approval by any parliament, there was no referendum, and that government, even the elected government from 2014 to 2022, had 8 years in which to bring that constitution to parliament and get it approved by parliament, or even have a referendum. But they did not do that. But they wrote it into their constitution that to change a single letter of that constitution, you had to have 3/4 of a parliament, and not only that, 3/4 of all the registered voters in the country, not the people voting, but registered voters. And Fiji, in its elections, has hardly ever had more than 70% of registered voters voting. So what are our young people to think when they are told, you had no say in this 2013 Constitution, your parents had no say in it, but your future is going to be determined by it, and you can't even change it today, because the 3 people or 4 people who approved that constitution behind closed doors and 1 person who signed it, right, as the president, they actually had no authority to do so. But our current young generation are told, you have to live by this 2013 constitution. I mean, to be honest, no government, can ever tolerate that. And some of the constitutional professors who have come and advised our Attorney General, like Professor Ann Toby, she's a professor emerita from University of Sydney, she has pointed out, a constitution is a living document. It must reflect the will of the people. And if the will of the people changes over time, then they should be allowed to change it. Who are the few individuals in the past who, behind secret closed doors, wrote up this constitution? Who are they to tell the current young generation in our country that they can't change this constitution? I mean, to be honest, it's just so unbearable, isn't it?
Now, Professor Narsey, what is your view on the electoral laws that Fiji has had since our independence in 1970?
Well, there've been a lot of changes. I mean, there was a time 50 years ago when our different ethnic groups felt very insecure. Our indigenous, brothers, the Itoke, as they're called now, the general voters, and so then, by having a constitution have ethnic constituencies, gave them some sense of security that their representatives would be in parliament, right? Now that was, 70 years ago. Today, I think our people have matured, right? Indigenous people are near roughly 65% of all the population of Fiji. Indo-Fijians are 33% of the population, right? And to be honest, I think, they do not need to have that security, in ethnic constituencies. So one good thing maybe, the Beni Marama government did do, right? And we must acknowledge the good things that they did do. One thing was they said everybody in the country, we're all equal, and they decided to call us all Fijians. Some people actually say, hey, hold on, why didn't you ask Fijians first whether we should call everybody Fijians, right? But the idea behind it all was everybody is equal. There'll be no ethnic constituencies, right? And they brought in what was a proportional system. I mean, in a proportional system, what it basically means, right, without going into the details about what we hope to recommend, right, in a proportional system, if 66% of the people of the country say we want to elect these people to parliament, well, they will elect 66% of parliament. If 33% of the people, call them whatever you like, Indo-Fijians or whatever, if they decide we are going to elect our people, the ones we want to parliament, whoever they are, then 33% of parliament will reflect that. So, when you look at the way electoral systems have changed over the years, there has been some progress, but I think if you have been reading the letters to the editor by Justice Fatiaki, right, which is what I read also when I called him, I say, hey, Justice Fatiaki, maybe you and I can combine our forces together, because you and I seem to be on the same page when it comes to the electoral deficiency in the current system. Maybe we can go a step further,
Mr. Fatiaki, what is your message to the people of this country on the review of the electoral laws that is about to begin?
Having a review of electoral laws is part of the democratic process. And we had people tell us about democracy, speak to us about democracy, and claim democracy. But this is your first true attempt to participate in something democratic, something in which you have a say in its final result. And so I ask you to turn out and speak to us. Tell us what you like, what you don't like. Tell us how you think we could improve on the system that presently exists. Tell us what things you like about it. Tell us what you don't like. Tell us what you see about people being elected to Parliament. Let me say one thing, Vijay, as a side. I too lived through the 1997 Constitution. And right now, the 1997 Constitution is like, no one can say anything bad about it. But I think Wadan has pointed out that even that Constitution is not perfect. And I can tell you this, when the 1997 Constitution came in, I was a judge in the Supreme Court, in the High Court of Fiji. And I was also the Chief Justice at part of the time, and we had to try and work this system under the 1997. And I have an opportunity now to tell you that we will not go back there, because what happened under that Constitution's electoral system, frankly, was a disaster. And how do I know? I know because I lived it. I know because we had to decide cases about ridiculous things, about ministerial assignments. And, you know, people were laughing and talking about, oh, he'll be the minister, we'll give them the minister of, I don't know, sewage or things like that.
Minister for Drains.
And it became totally ridiculous. That came under this 97 Constitution. It is not perfect, please. You know, so, I mean, people I read inviting us to go back there. I'm saying, no, I don't want to take us back there, and I have an opportunity to recommend to this country an electoral system which won't allow us to go back there. Because what happened then was disastrous.
You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. We'll be back after this break. About 20 years ago, we had a major drug bust, and you would remember, you would have been part of the operations at Laudala Beach. A lot of people in Fiji did not know what was methamphetamine. And what we are picking up on, people are saying it's readily available. Just the issue in relation to General Secretary, was that a tactical move that he ejected himself from Parliament?
Personally, it's unfortunate.
How are you dealing with those police officers who may be allegedly involved in this?
Vijay, no one is above the law.
We assure you that we will be having police officers around.
As a result of that bad policy, by the end of this month, we would have lost close to about $70 million in government revenue.
Bulavinaka, I am Vijay Narayan. This is Fiji Village Straight Talk.
Fiji Village Straight Talk with Vijay Narayan. Watch it live on the Fiji Village Facebook page and YouTube channel.
Welcome back. You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. Our guest tonight is the chair of the Electoral Reform Commission and former Chief Justice Daniel Fatiaki, an economist and former National Federation Party parliamentarian. Also, one of the Electoral Reform Commissioners, Professor Wadan Narsey, who is joining us from Melbourne via Zoom. And Mr. Fatiaki,
Yes.
for both of you, the question about why is there real need to review these electoral laws?
Well, I suppose the short, simple answer to that, Vijay, is that laws serve the people. Laws serve our society. So if our society changes, the laws need to change. And that's why we have reviews, to make the laws user-friendly and able to be used and utilized by the people. A law which is written in stone and can't be changed is not user-friendly, and it actually lacks a characteristic of true law, which is to serve the people that it's written for. Why do we need a review? Because it's been a long time since we had one. I think, and our experiences over the past 16 years has maybe given us an idea of what things we like about it, what things we don't like about the electoral laws, and so this is the opportunity to actually review it. I'm very proud to be chairman of this particular commission. It is something that's close to my heart, and I really need for the people to come out. What we've done to help the people and excite and interest them is to have a huge presentation in the media. My children were joking about me the other day and saying, well, we've got a celebrity in our midst. Whenever I appeal, my sons say, Dad, you're a celebrity. I said, no, I'm not a celebrity. This is a media blitz that we need for the Commission. Why? Because we don't want you to treat us like every other commission. No, we're not. We're very special. We affect you very deeply. And while you might think, oh, we only vote every 4 years, that might be so. But a vote is more than a tick. It is more than a number. It actually is you deciding who is going to go into our parliament to represent you for the next 4 years. So treat it like that. Treat it as something that important. And so, what we've done is we've also created what we call a questionnaire prompt list. You would have seen it in the papers. We've translated it into 3 languages. It is in Fiji Hindi, in the Itauke language, and in English. If you read those questions in your vernacular or else in English, you will realize very quickly what we're talking about and how much we need your help. We want you to think about those questions, think about how you can answer them, and come and tell us your answers. There are no right or wrong answers. What there are is, these are discussion points. But we want you to be thinking about these things even before you come. And that's why we don't start our sittings until next week, but we published our questionnaire last week. So please read it and come and speak to us.
Professor Narsey, why do you think that there's a real need to review these electoral laws?
We have to look at it from the point of view of voters in Fiji, not just in cities, but throughout the country, and all kinds of voters, educated people, some who are not so educated. And you ask them, well, what was your experience been like for the last sort of 8 years in voting? And has it really helped you to elect somebody you know who will go to Parliament and represent your views and your problems, address your problems in water, and roads, and sewage, and electricity? Do you know who your member of Parliament is? And, all of them, what they will remember is that when they went to the polling booth, they were given a big piece of paper with about 400 numbers on it, no names, no pictures, no party symbols, and they're told, tick one number or circle one number. And they're also told, you can't take a voter help card in with you because in case your family might say, okay, give your card, go and vote for this number. If you're found with a number, then you're prosecuted, and possibly fined and jailed. I mean, how utterly atrocious was that, right? So voters, if you ask them, do you really think that you know who your parliamentarian is, who you can go to for your problems? Well, let's not forget, there was one Superman who got about 200,000 votes, 180,000 votes. How can 180,000 people go to that Superman and say, please, can you fix up my electricity in Wenibakasi or Madhuwata or whatever? So I think we sort of already have an understanding that voters are very unhappy with the system that's there. They can see that there are some people in Parliament who've only got 200, 300, 400 votes. And then there are some political leaders, big guys, outside. I won't mention names, because then people might think I'm pushing their agenda, who are not in Parliament, although they had 7, 8, 9,000 votes. So there's something wrong with the whole system. And I think even Justice Fatiaki says that the questions we've got in what we're putting out as ads are asking people to think about these things and to think whether they might like to change some aspect of our whole voting system and legislation to make it better for them to feel that democracy is at work, and that when they go to the polling booth, it does matter who they put a tick for or who they put a number for. And I think I'm hoping that, from what you have talked about and what you have suggested in your questions to us, there will be some kind of a return to constituencies so people feel a closer bond with the people who they elect. Maybe independents can get into parliament, maybe smaller parties can get into parliament, and whoever is leading the country thinks about everybody, and don't get so complacent. They can say, oh, doesn't matter. We don't have to think about the public. We'll just stay as we are and we'll come back next election anyway, which would be a disaster, So I think your question is important. Why do you think there's a need for change in the electoral system? Well, hey, mate, don't ask me. Go and ask the voters and they will tell you. I'm sure your listeners and viewers will ring in and tell you why they think that the system should be changed.
Well, what is coming through and is quite critical is that one of the reasons why people saying it is about time that a review takes place is because all these laws came in the form of a decree with no consultation. They were just rammed through. Now, Justice Fatiaki, what is your view on the current voting system where you just go with a piece of paper with just numbers on them?
I call that centre vote. That's the only closest experience I have to this kind of ballot paper is what I remember as a child. When I was in primary school, we'd get centre vote cards with hundreds of numbers on it, and you sold it for a cent for each one. So that's a sort of rather offbeat way of talking about it. But you really have come onto a favorite topic of mine. I think if anyone has read my letters, they'll realize very clearly that I have fairly strong views about the existing electoral system. I don't really want to push my views. My views are not important. The only importance and the only reason why I wrote these letters was to tell the people and explain to the people in simple terms, in 4 paragraphs, not 4 pages or 4 volumes, 4 paragraphs, what their electoral system was like. If they didn't know, now they know by reading my 4 paragraphs. I had fairly positive feedback on it. But I think that an electoral system which doesn't recognize the need for people to have and know their representatives in Parliament is one which is lacking. It's certainly one that we're not familiar with, and it's strange, actually. And I think its results are strange. What I mean by that? Because people with 200 votes can get into Parliament when people with 1,200 votes can't. So I began to ask myself these questions, and I didn't really think about it. I mean, I already knew about these things. I didn't feel strongly enough about it to actually write. But for those of you who don't know, my brother, Dr. John Fatiaki, stood in the last election and was unsuccessful. And that made me look at this system a bit more closely. And I wondered why someone like my brother, a very well qualified medical practitioner, couldn't get into Parliament. And yet there were, unqualified 200 vote people who were there in Parliament, and it sort of made me wonder what kind of system throws this up and allows this to happen. And is that democracy? Is that the democracy we want? Where, I don't know, the minority rules or the majority is supposed to rule? But this democracy, it seems to be a one-man autocracy pretending to be a democracy. And everybody else, I don't know how they see themselves, but they must know that they got in through some strange system. If they think that's democratic, well, that's their right to think it. And I'm hoping that they will address the Commission during its rounds and speak to us, justify the system they have. Let us have a robust discussion of it. But let's not let it be like it was, well, it was dictated to us and we're stuck with it. We're not. Neither are we stuck with the 2013 Constitution.
Well, that's an interesting point of view, Mr. Fatiaki, in relation to the electoral system, which is also connected to the Constitution. If you look at the electoral laws and review them, and the Constitution stays as it is, we have the elections next year from August onwards, I think anywhere between August to about January the following
February
the following year.
Yes.
If we do not address that, we still will have the same electoral system going into the next election. So what is your thought process regarding that?
Well, right from the very first day that I was appointed, Vijay, you may have read in the papers or heard, but I used the figure of horse and cart. I'm also now almost infamous with the media when I talk about the elephant in the room. Well, I suggested that my job is being the cart and the horse somehow is still hanging around. So it's putting the cart before the horse, or else, asking me to review the little laws that are surrounding the elephant, and the elephant's not moved out of the room. So the elephant and the horse is the 2013 Constitution. And unless and until there is the political will to remove the horse and the elephant, it is, well, it's difficult. And in fact, whatever recommendation we make for a new electoral system, if we make one, is unlikely to come to fruition before 2027. So yes, it's inevitably intertwined. Why? Because those powers that be who dictated this constitution for us decided to triply entrench it, the electoral system. Not in an electoral act as it used to be, but no, this thing is in the electoral constitution provisions. And whilst it might have been in the constitutions before, those constitutions could be changed. This one is, well, some people say it's the unamendable amendments. But that belongs, I suppose, now as a question for the Supreme Court to consider. And who knows, maybe the parliamentarians will come back with another bill and have another go at it. And maybe they'll have the proper, correct majorities. I don't know. That's outside my remit. What I have to do is deal with the electoral laws. But I can assure the people that we are very conscious of the February 2027 time limit, and we're certainly working very hard to make sure that we are not an obstacle should there be a recommendation. Our recommendation should be before Parliament and Cabinet, or certainly before Cabinet, by the end of June. That's our timeline. And hopefully matters can move from there.
Professor Narsey, some are saying that we should have a constituency-based system, not the one constituency which is Fiji. What are the advantages and maybe disadvantages to have that system?
Well, I think the advantages, are very, very clear. I mean, if you were to ask a general question in the media, who in the present parliament represents the interests of a particular community anywhere in Fiji? You won't get any answer, because there is no direct link between any regional area of Fiji like Lawmaking or Yasawas with any member of parliament. And so there's a whole, been expression of popular, criticism, in the media for years now, that people would like to vote for their own MP. And so if you have a local constituency where, 8, 9, 10 people stand belonging to political parties, some may be independents, at least the voters in that area can say, okay, the winner of the election in our constituency will represent us, and we can go to them and ask them to address our issues, right? Now, under the old systems that Daniel Fatiaki, criticized, the 97 Constitution, you only had constituencies, and you did not have the national proportionality, which is also one of the questions you are asking us to explain, right? And honestly, I think what the public are asking for is both. They're asking for constituencies, but they're also asking for proportionality, which exists to some extent in the current system, right? And that proportionality basically would mean that if a large percentage of the people in the country want some particular, member of parliament or some party, they should be able to have that influence on parliament. As I explained earlier in our interview, if 66% of the people of the country who represent indigenous Fijians, if they want to elect a certain group of people to parliament, well, 66% of parliament will represent them. And similarly, for, the Indo-Fijians in country, I'm not telling Indo-Fijians just vote for Indo-Fijian representatives, because in the past, Indo-Fijians have voted for non-Indo-Fijian MPs and vice versa, right? So, but in a proportional system, if you add it to a constituency system, you protect both sort of interests. So, I think there are some possibilities there. And I believe that, when the team goes around Fiji, listening to the views of people, I think some of these things will come out loudly and clearly, and it'll be up to the team to take on board those recommendations.
Justice Fatiaki,
Yes.
what are your thoughts on the current system, just having one constituency saying these are all MPs who are supposed to serve the whole of Fiji?
Thank you, Vijay. Again, back on my favorite hobby horse. My most famous letter to the editor started off by saying, I couldn't believe that in a nation of almost 1 million people, with 2 large islands and 3 smaller islands and 3 island groups spread over hundreds of islands, that we ended up with one constituency. It just, mentally, I couldn't work it out. How is that possible, that we could have one constituency in a country that large, that varied, and that spread out? But that's what we got lumped with. And the worst part about it is, as Wadan has been saying, a country with only one constituency has no representatives. They profess and they say things like, well, under this system, we elected parliamentarians in government, we represent all of you. Well, my answer to that usually is, yes, I know. You represent all of us and none of us. So on paper, you represent all of us, but in reality, you represent none of us. You only represent yourself and continuing to remain in Parliament. And how do you do that? By cutting favour with your leader, who dragged you into Parliament on his coattails. That's where your loyalty lies. That's where you answer to. And we have seen that demonstrated often enough over the past 8 years.
So
Under this electoral system.
So basically a superstar status and everyone follows.
That's it. I've called this thing the big man system. But the interesting thing is, I mentioned that in one of my interviews, is that we've lost apparently 2 of the big men. So what's going to happen at the next election if we continue under this electoral system? Is there going to be enough big men or no big men? I don't know. We know there's one still in existence, and is he going to get it all? We're going to have a parliament with just one big man and everybody else with him? Because we can't find another big man in time to compete with that big man.
And
Because we know we've lost the other two.
And is that democratic?
Well, it's not. You know, it's a competition between two big men. And quite often, when, like they say, when elephants fight, the grass is the one that suffers. And the grass are the electorate, the people, when two big men fight.
There's a very interesting point that Justice Fatiaki is making there, Vijay. But, you know, people in the current parliament, both on government side and on the opposition side, although those lines have been blurred recently, but they need to think, okay, come the next election, even if this current system is there, right, how will they get back into parliament? Now, I'm sure that if any sensible person who knows the numbers of votes received in the last election, if they look at the parties like People's Alliance Party, like Sojalpa, like National Federation Party, they will see that the MPs from those parties have very large numbers of votes, behind them. And they have got constituencies where they go to and get votes. Now, the people on the former Fiji First Party, well, they relied on the big man, and maybe one or two people at the top had a constituency which they can go back to. But the rest of the 26, 25 MPs, they have to ask themselves, hold on, where will I go to next to get the votes I need to get back into parliament? Because at the moment, they only have 300, 400 votes. So, there's some interesting thinking that at our current members of parliament have to do about what they will do in the next election. And my feeling is, that the system that the team led by Justice Fatiaki is likely to recommend, and we have a sort of a rough idea. We can't say what it is now, but that will make it easy for people who have their local followers to go there and get their votes and have a reasonable chance of getting into parliament and even independence. I mean, look, one of the sad things about the current system is if you don't get 5% of the votes, which is 23,000 votes, you can't get into parliament.
I was just about to ask you, Professor Narsey, about the 5% threshold.
Yes. Well, 5% threshold, 23,000 votes, you can't get into parliament. An independent, how on earth can they get 23,000 votes? I mean, even if you look at some very popular leaders like Mr. Savinathan Arube, like Mr. Mahen Chaudhry, I mean, they are popular politicians. They've got thousands of votes behind them. And yet, they could not make the 5% threshold. So can you imagine an independent local community leader from Singatoka or Lambasa or Taveuni? There's no hope on earth of them ever getting into parliament. So, really, what we have to do is seriously, there are people saying, I think, they've been saying it to Justice Fatiaki, look, we need to make it easier for smaller parties to get in. Of course, the larger parties may object, but just remember something else. Some parties who are large parties today, in this current parliament, they may be a bit smaller next time the election comes around. Yeah? And under the 5% threshold, they might not make it back into parliament. But if we have a threshold which is a bit lower, not only might the smaller parties be guaranteed to come back, but also might independents be able to come back, And honestly, it is seriously something that the people out there need to think about and tell Justice Fatiaki's team when they're going around the country, about, well, what do you think, about you're able to get your own local representative into parliament? How do you ensure that, right? So, I mean, the 5% threshold will be something that they might need to think about.
You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. We'll be back after this break. About 20 years ago, we had a major drug bust, and you would remember, you would have been part of the operations at Laudala Beach. A lot of people in Fiji did not know what was methamphetamine. And what we are picking up on, people are saying it's readily available. Just the issue in relation to General Secretary, was that a tactical move that he ejected himself from Parliament?
Personally, it's unfortunate.
How are you dealing with those police officers who may be allegedly involved in this?
No one is above the law.
We assure you that we will be having police officers around.
As a result of that bad policy, by the end of this month, we would have lost close to about $70 million in government revenue.
Bula Vinaka, I am Vijay Narayan. This is Fiji Village Straight Talk.
Fiji Village Straight Talk with Vijay Narayan. Watch it live on the Fiji Village Facebook page and YouTube channel.
Welcome back. You're watching Fiji Village Straight Talk. I'm Vijay Narayan. Our guest tonight is the chair of the Electoral Reform Commission, Daniel Fatiaki, and Professor Wadan Narsey, who's one of the Electoral Law Reform Commissioners, former National Federation Party parliamentarian, also an economist who is joining us via Zoom from Melbourne. We have talked about the electoral system and the real need to change it or to review it, and citizens' participation critical. That's what is being said by the commissioners here. And consultations, of course, open up from next week from around the country. Mr. Fatiaki, just previously, ballot papers had candidate names. They had party names and party symbols on the ballot paper. All of these also are no longer visible, as we discussed about the ballot paper just having numbers. What are your thoughts on this? Are you also advocating for these things to come back, like, for example, candidate names, party names or symbols on ballot papers, so that people can identify candidates much easier when they go to the ballot booth?
Yes, thank you for that question, Vijay. Yes, I've had a lot of interesting feedback on that particular thing, and a lot of people have given indications that is certainly, no matter what electoral system we've got in place, they want to be able to see the people they're voting for. And I understand that totally, and that's if that's what the people want, we'll certainly recommend it. I think the anonymity of a centre vote card, is what I call it, is really almost anti-democratic. There's a secrecy that is quite unnecessary in an electoral system which should be open. We have a people and a population which, although we're very literate people, that doesn't mean that we're familiar with electoral systems, which are complicated, and they only seriously come around our lives every 4 years. But, because it's unfamiliar to us, I think anything which will help our people to place a vote or a tick or a number in favor of the person who they truly want to represent them is a crucial right to vote. It's part of that right. It's useless giving people a right to vote and then you don't allow them to know the person they're voting for, or you don't give them any help with exercising that right. And that's what's been missing in the last elections under the last electoral system. The people haven't been assisted in making their vote and casting their votes. So we had that strange experience. I seem to remember how, because some candidate had a number very close to one of the big men, because of the misunderstanding of people in the number, this unknown candidate had hundreds of votes that he'd never even expected. But all of that turned because there was that strange situation where one number made the difference between a correct vote and what was in effect a defective vote. So, that's a system which can lend itself very easily to that kind of ridiculous thing. because people didn't know by name the person they were voting for, couldn't see by picture the face that they were voting for, and couldn't see by party symbol the party that they're voting for. So all these things help our voters, to help anything that helps the voters, I think is important.
Professor Narsey, what do you think of the counting system?
Well, the counting system, if you remember, during the last election, there was an alleged glitch. And nobody knows what the glitch was about. And honestly, the system that was in place was so complicated, depend on some computer program brought in by some company from Pakistan or whatever, right? And honestly, the public, because there were all these harsh laws which prevented our local NGOs from monitoring the counting. How ridiculous that you don't allow local NGOs to monitor counting, but you allow international groups to monitor the counting. So we hope, in fact, that whatever we have in place, the counting process will be so transparent that people will be able to see immediately the result that's appearing, in every local counting station and in the central counting station. And it has to be a simple exercise. And we believe it will be fairly simple. And time will tell to see what exactly our people tell us about what our eventual system is going to be. But we believe that what we'll end up recommending, will have to be something that is simple enough for the elections office to implement without any glitches from occurring.
Now, Mr. Fatiaki, also the issue in relation to reserve seats. That has come up a few times about whether we still need certain seats reserved for different ethnic groups, as it was in the 1997 Constitution and before that. What are your thoughts on that?
I think, Vijay, my thoughts on reserve seats, certainly the particular example you raised, this country, our nation, has moved beyond ethnicity. We are no longer interested in ethnic seats, I believe, and I think we're ready to vote for anybody and everybody. So I am very doubtful that the commission I am chairing will take us back to that. There will be no more ethnic seats. And in fact, frankly, that was a positive development in the last government, in their last electoral system, that no more voting would be done on ethnic lines. We've developed enough since 1970 not to want it. But having said that, whilst we've developed beyond our ethnicities, we haven't developed yet beyond our genders and beyond the kind of society we have, the patrilineal society, the society where women's roles are stereotypical, where they are expected to defer to men. So I'm hopeful with this commission that we will address that. I will say one thing: I'm very pleasantly surprised that the literature on CEDAW, which presently I understand is holding a conference or workshop in this country, I'm very pleasantly surprised that under CEDAW they have what they call temporary measures. And these temporary measures, from my ancient time, I used to call them affirmative action. But these temporary measures actually allow seats to be reserved for women. And that is not against international conventions.
Do you support that idea?
And I support it immensely. I can't believe how lucky I am to have actually read about how these measures are now considered, that they're available and acceptable and do not discriminate.
There's a thought process that should be voted in based on the number of votes rather than reserved seats based on gender. That has been also raised by some of the women MPs as well in the past. What do you have to say about that?
Well, our past experience with women elected into Parliament, beyond the exceptional women who were elected, is that for a country that's half its population is female, we still haven't got anywhere near half the members of Parliament being female. So, I mean, that is the sort of ideal target. And even now, after all these years of independence and all those electoral systems and all the elections that have been held, we still have women that you can count on one hand, or if we're lucky, two hands. And these are in parliaments of 50, 60, 70 members. So that percentage needs to change. My commission hopes to take these measures and address that. If there's going to be reserved for, would like to present reserved seats for women.
Professor Narsey, your thoughts on that?
I can just repeat what Justice Fatiaki has said. There's a real conundrum in front of us, that right from independence, half of the voters in the country have been women. And yet they have failed to elect more than 30% or even more than 20% of members in Parliament as women. And so the question is, we have to ask ourselves, why is it that good women don't stand for elections? And that's what Justice Fatiaki pointed out, were all the social intimidating factors that prevent good women from standing for elections. And the fact that good women have in the past stood for election and not been elected. I mean, I can remember the late Dr. Taufa Mbole, and she wasn't elected. And yet, half of the voters are women. So in our terms of reference that have been given to us, we are asked to consider temporary and special measures. And we believe that there are two mechanisms that we may be able to consider. One is simply having a small number of reserved seats where only women can stand and only women vote. And there'll be no possibility there for patriarchy coming in to influence the voting. I mean, women's leaders are always blaming men for not electing women. But if you have a special seat where only women can stand and only women can vote, then that's guaranteed to have women representation in Parliament. Now, how many we have, that will be up to the Commission to consider in terms of suggestions.
So are you planning to recommend this based on public consultation, or the Commission is planning to present this irrespective of what comes through public consultation?
Oh, both, Vijay. I mean, if the public don't want it, I don't think that our Commission is going to say no. We're going to have, a temporary and special measure. But my feeling is that I think the team will ask the leaders of women's organizations in Fiji what are their thoughts on the matter, and let's see what they say. But the other mechanism we might consider, of course, is the closed list system, which was up for discussion during the Yash Ghai Commission's deliberations, where in the closed list, parties put their women on top of the list. And there's no voting for them, of course. They can't come down the list. Once they put on top of the list, the public can see, oh, okay, this party does really care about getting more women in Parliament, and they get votes. And if parties put up a list where there is no women on top, no young women on top or whatever, then of course voters can say, well, hold on, this party is not very favorable towards us women. So I think, the team will consider both mechanisms, right? And it's up to the public to advise us what they would like us to consider. I mean, I particularly have very strong views on it because, in the last 10, 15 years, I've been doing a lot of work on the empowerment of women and girls in Fiji. And always, when we talk about economic empowerment, the women's organizations have reminded me, and we've always had a little chapter at the end of it, like, FWRM monograph last year, beyond 33%. They said, well, hold on, you don't even have 33% in parliament. And if you don't have more women in parliament, how can women get economic justice? So they link. I mean, the women's organizations link economic justice for women with political justice at the parliamentary level. So I'm sure the team will hear suggestions, and the team, will consider it. I'm happy. I mean, that Justice Fatiaki is on the same page, as me on that as well. I mean, we'll see where it goes. Actually, we can't say what we're going to present in our report at the end of June, but hopefully, it will have something on better representation of women.
Mr. Fatiaki and Professor Narsey, there's also concerns coming through in relation to a review of laws, whether it will throw off things like race-based voting and things like that, where it may go down the racial path. What's your thoughts on that, Mr. Fatiaki?
Thank you, Vijay. If I could just repeat myself, the short answer to that question is the commission that I am chairing is very unlikely to recommend that we go down that route. I think our nation has developed enough for us to be able to vote as a nation and think as a nation rather than think on ethnic lines. That doesn't mean that people feel uncomfortable voting for their own. I understand that totally. But that will not be built into the system like we used to have ethnic seats. No more. These will all be open.
Professor Narsey?
Well, Vijay, I support, what Justice Fatiaki has said 100%. We have moved beyond those ethnic constituencies and all that. But I think the public can also think about one statistical result of a proportional system. If you have a proportional system where the percentage in parliament represents the percentage of voters in the community, put it very crudely, without going back to, indigenous Fijian versus Indo-Fijian conflicts and all that, right? Whoever the 66% of the voting population who are indigenous Fijians, whoever they vote for, that's the proportion they will get in parliament, guaranteed. Whoever the 33% of Indo-Fijian voters in Fiji vote for, that is the percentage of MPs they will get in parliament. That's guaranteed under a proportional system. And without us having to say, oh, you're going to have ethnic constituencies. It's an incredible result. And if you look at the current parliament, well, I mean, of course, there's a lot of people who came in there under the Superman umbrella, right? But there's a mixture there of indigenous Fijians, Indo-Fijians and all that. And roughly, they're about the same percentage as the population. I think there are other systems which will make that even clearer. So that, hopefully, no ethnic group in Fiji will ever feel we can't have representation. I mean, even Rotumans, if we have a constituency that represents them, well, they'll have a Rotuman MP in parliament, Let me take that back, because Justice Fatiaki might think, that he put me up to this.
Will you still profess for the declaration of assets and liabilities of all the candidates, politicians who intend to represent their people, to make declarations on what they own and what they owe?
Well, I suggest that Justice Fatiaki is the best person to talk on this. But, my own feeling is that when people go into parliament, they need to declare the assets and liabilities and what exactly they are, so that the public can see that in their parliamentary decisions, they're not feathering their own nest, But I think Justice Fatiaki can speak more,
Yes.
Mr. Fatiaki?
Yes, thank you, Vijay. That is an important question. And when I first thought about it, I thought, well, why do we bother with these things? I think it's important for two reasons. One is what Professor Narsey has said, but the other one is we want politicians or people who seek to be parliamentarians to already have a certain level of comfort. We don't want, people who are totally penniless to be standing. We need them to have a certain level of self-independence. They demonstrate, people with assets and assets certainly, demonstrates an ability to consider their future, be future-looking rather than live for today. I think it's a reflection also of the person. So removing it totally is not really part of our thinking. What is part of our thinking is that this should not be used and weaponized. The law, the electoral law and most law needs to be de-weaponized. And this is something that has happened with our laws over the past 16 years. They weaponized our laws. What do I mean by that? When I grew up and studied law, the law was a protector. That was its function. It protected the people against abuse of authority and power by others. And the law stood to protect. When you weaponize the law and use it to attack the people, that is not what the law is about. And that's what I mean when I say this declaration of assets and liabilities, whilst a rational requirement, cannot be allowed to be weaponized. And that has been happening. It's being abused. And people are being, terrified by it. And it shouldn't be. The law shouldn't terrify. The law should be rational and be able to explain itself and justify its existence. And if it can't be rational and it can't explain itself and it can't justify its existence, it shouldn't be a law. It's pure and simple.
Final question for tonight, gentlemen. The people are watching out there, and we know that we have spoken about the elephant in the room, that you can be giving any reports, but if it's recommendations that directly link to the Constitution, of course the Constitution needs to be amended before that comes into effect. How are we going about to do that, and what is your message to the people on what should motivate them to take part in the consultation that's starting from next week?
Thank you, Vijay. Yes, the Constitution belongs to the people. And whilst the particular review that I'm dealing with deals with the electoral laws, the electoral laws also is part of the Constitution. It's dictated under the Constitution. So it's almost inevitable. You can't ask to have the electoral laws reviewed without it impacting the Constitution or vice versa. Let me say this, that this review is something that was generated by government. It's not something that just fell out of the sky or it was a good idea that we thought about. No, this review was actually initiated by government. So the government wants us to review the law also. That's why they appointed us. They must have been and are conscious that in doing so we would need to address certainly the electoral, legal, constitutional aspects of our review. But in doing so, because of the nature of the Constitution being so difficult to amend, we would need to also address in our own way how we think that particular question might be answered. But as I said before, Vijay, that I don't wish to preempt anybody, and least of all would I wish to preempt what the Supreme Court might decide if a referral is going ahead to the Supreme Court. But yes, that's what I'm saying. Our review doesn't directly involve the Constitution. We are not a constitutional review commission. We are electoral review. It just so happens that the two are never involved.
Professor Narsey.
Well, I think what Justice Fatiaki has said, I don't need to repeat any of that. But to emphasize one little point in there, the nature of politicians, is self-preservation usually, right? And they don't want any changes in case it doesn't preserve their status. So here we, is the coalition government, which could equally have said to itself, let's not bother with this. We came in under this, and we can continue under this till the cows come home. But they know that the system was not good. And they took the very bold and courageous step of saying, let's call for a review of the electoral laws. And I think you will see in the advertisement that is going out that one of the questions that the review team asks the public to consider is, do you think that the Constitution should be changed, in order to bring about the changes in the electoral laws that you would like to see? Do you think it should be changed? Now, whatever the method is, how the government does it, it's up to government's legal beagles to decide whether they just call for a Supreme Court judgment, whether they call on constitutional lawyers from Australia to come and give their advice, whatever. That's their choice, right? But the question that the people can tell the team about is, yes, we think the electoral system needs to be changed. And if you need to change the Constitution, please try to request the government to do it, and for themselves to also request the government to deal with the elephant in the room that Justice Fatiaki has described so well. So I think, ultimately it all comes back to what the people want. And I think we need to recognize this coalition government's courage, in wanting an improvement to the system. And we sincerely hope that the people who are currently in opposition, half of whom have joined the coalition government anyway, we hope actually that they can also see that. And the next time any motion comes up in Parliament to bring about changes in the Constitution for the good of Fiji, we hope that they join the coalition government in supporting those motions.
Mr. Fatiaki, as chair of the commission, your final words to the people watching out there tonight?
The electoral system is yours. We need you to own it. And in order to own it, you need to come and tell us what you want in it. We are not magicians, and we need your help. Please come. Wherever you are, we speak all three languages in this country in our commission. We will entertain you. We will have people who can speak to you and help us. So please don't feel any difficulty in coming to us. Thank you, Vijay.
That's the chair of the Electoral Reform Commission and former Chief Justice Daniel Fatiaki, an economist and former National Federation Party parliamentarian and Electoral Review Commission member, Professor Wadan Narsey. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time this evening. I'm sure our users and followers and listeners enjoyed this, also on a podcast, which can be heard on Fiji Village Straight Talk with Vijay Narayan. You can download as well on Spotify or Apple Podcast. And until next week, have a great evening.
Thank you, Vijay.
Thank you, Vijay.